Good morning, good evening, whenever you're listening. This is your host, Tom.
I'm Mike.
Oh,
I'm really far away from the microphone. I thought you were going to do the whole Truman Show thing for a second.
Truman Show.
Yeah, he's like, howdy, neighbor, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Oh, it's been so long since I saw that movie. So, you're listening to the second episode of Behind the Bat.
Yerp.
And I think this might be our format going forward. We're going to, we made up a list, 20 different items that were generally like just topics that we generally like and want to talk about. And we're going to roll a d20.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the one we're going to talk about.
Are you ready?
Yes. All right.
Do we want to give them the list?
Yeah. So we're going to give the list first.
Okay.
Okay. Number 1, Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, silent films.
Yes.
Number 3, Castlevania.
Excellent.
Number 4, Metroid.
Right on.
Number 5, Zelda.
All right.
Number 6, Mario.
Sweet.
Number 7, Metal Gear Solid.
Hell yeah.
8, classic anime.
Who?
9, Super Nintendo.
That should be pretty fun.
10, PlayStation.
I wish I could do the PlayStation sound from when you boot the PlayStation up, but
I could put that on the soundboard.
I know. I'm just trying to say stupid things between all of your lists here.
11, fighting games.
Yes.
12, Resident Evil. Resident Evil. 13, Star Wars. 14, D&D.
Star Wars is the only one I couldn't say anything for.
15, alcohol. 16, Final Fantasy.
Woo.
17, Game Boy.
Game Boy.
18, sci-fi. 19, game console modding / the future of gaming. And number 20, Japanese cinema.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of cut you off there. Sorry.
A lot of options there.
Yes.
A lot of fun things to talk about. Some of these could go on forever and
Yeah.
ever and ever. So
Yep. Normally we're gonna do this like off the cuff, but like we ran over on our recording for the first thing, so we're just gonna film this thing and then record this thing. We're gonna record a roll, and then sometime later this week we'll get together and talk about it. And this will all be just one episode, so you don't have to worry about it.
Yep. You guys won't even know.
Yeah. Do you want to do the honor of the roll then?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a 2.
2, silent films.
That's excellent because you need to watch more silent films.
I do need this is like the one I know like that have like maybe the least to say, like at least that I know off the top of my head.
Well, that's like me in Star Wars. Like
Yeah.
I grew up with it and I like it, but I'm not like, oh hell yeah, Star Wars.
Okay. Well,
So this one is like, yeah, silent film, and I'll have a lot to tell you about it, and a lot
Okay.
of it relates to Batman too, which is
oh,
excellent.
That's
'cause
gonna be good. Okay.
silent film existed between like 1918 and like 1939. Or like 1940 is probably like when the last one came out. So it's like right up to when Batman came out. So a lot of influence there.
All right. So we're gonna take a quick pause and you won't even know it. So
We'll see you next week.
stick around. And we are back. So we rolled for silent films, and that was about 2 weeks ago at this point.
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, we kind of had like a week gap or so. So we're back to it. So forgive me my rustiness. You take like a week off, and it just like it all like becomes really rusty and difficult to talk again.
Sometimes it does. Sometimes I feel like the week off is necessary, but
Yeah.
this time I feel a little rusty.
Yeah. So we rolled for silent films, and this is something that Mike is far more has more expertise than I do.
Right.
But yeah, so I'll let you take the lead on.
Well, I'm not going to say I'm
Majority.
like an expert in silent film. Like,
Right.
I do know, I have seen quite a few of them, and I do
Yeah.
know a lot of stuff about them just because I'm like a horror movie expert
Mm-hmm.
or self-proclaimed horror movie expert. I'm sure there's someone out there who could school me.
Yeah. Well, okay. Enthusiast. Let's go with enthusiast.
Highly enthused.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So silent film is like the basis of all film, right? Like the very first films ever made were silent films.
Mm-hmm.
And silent doesn't mean no sound, it just means no dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So they're usually in black and white or sepia tone. Some of them have like a certain color filter, like blue or purple or green. And then they're usually short, under an hour, but there are quite a few of them that are like feature length, like an hour and 45 to 2 hours.
Right.
And then they do have genres as well, like comedy, horror, romance, science fiction, but that's about as far as it goes. Because silent film only lasted from like 1910 which I think is like the earliest, or like 19. I think 1902 is the earliest, all the way up to like 1930.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one or two that came out in like 1931. But after that, like the ability to include sound in films was like a really important thing. So you have movies like Vampire that came out in 1931 or 1932, where it's mostly silent and it still uses title cards, but there is sound.
Yeah, I heard there was like a big adjustment period.
Yeah.
Where like because it's an entirely different process,
Right.
or like when you make a silent film rather than a quote unquote talkie.
Yeah. Initially, when they started adding sound to films, they weren't doing like ADR. They were trying to find a way to have the sound picked up in real time.
Mm-hmm.
So you had like this weird adjustment period where there was audio, but it sounded bad, or like it was like echoey, or just, didn't quite sync right.
Mm-hmm.
So the directors would still try to keep it mostly as a silent film with all the same techniques, and then just have like one or two lines of dialogue here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Or they would have like sound effects only, but
Yeah.
all the dialogue would still be written in the title cards.
Mm.
But like a true silent film, there's minimal title cards. Like you usually, let's say your hour and 45-minute movie, right? It would have like 20 title cards. So you have to infer a lot while watching it, which makes them, like back in the day, if you watch them, that would be your only option. So it's fine. But now when you watch a silent film, you have to infer a lot. So it's sort of like watching an art house film or something, or like a film from a director who has a lot more to say than what they actually say. You have to read lips, because the title cards in between scenes may only say like a paragraph of stuff.
Yeah.
But then you can still read the lips of the actors and see what they're actually saying.
And then, well, they'd also would act differently than they would in a talkie. They would definitely
They overact.
Yeah.
But it's funny because like silent film started in like the 1900s, like early, like 1901, 1902.
Mm-hmm.
The early ones, they're very much overacting, and they feel like stage plays that are on film.
Yeah.
Like it's like they put up a stage, they built all the sets and the props, and then they interact very much on like a 2D plane, and they record it, and that's the movie. And like they pause it, they move everything out, they bring in the new sets, they resume recording, and it feels very much just like a stage play.
Yeah, Trip to the Moon was very.
I was
very
going to say
much
Trip
like
to the
that.
Moon. There's
Yeah.
a movie called The Old Hag, which is really, really good. And then there's I think it's called Voyage to the Sun or Trip to the Sun. Those are like some really, really old ones, and those all look like that. But they're very, very creative. Like mind-blowingly creative with like how little they have to work with.
Yeah.
They have like paper puppets and stuff like that. Like pulley systems to make things work, things that are like underneath the floor that they're like, like controlling from like off stage. So it's really cool. They feel more like stage plays though, but they're really inspiring to like see how much they could do with how little that they thought that they had. And then you have like your next step of silent films, which starts in like 1905 or so. And that's where you get like the overacting, right? Like they're no longer limited to like filming it like a stage play. They're actually filming on real locations, because the cameras are like, they're big and heavy still, but they're easier to make portable. They have come up with like tripods. And those become a little bit more immersive because it feels like a real life situation, because you're actually in a real life situation, in a real place, a real location. But you have the overacting, right? Like when people are laughing, they're not just like, ha ha ha. They're like, oh, ha, ha, ha. Like their whole body moves.
Yeah. Which I think also comes from like stage plays, doesn't it?
It does come from stage too. Yeah. But it's funny because like when you watch the silent films that are like shot like a stage play, they're not overacting. It just feels like overacting because they're shooting it at like a really low speed.
Yeah.
Right? So things seem to like move really fast.
I heard it would be a while till they like basically like the 24 frames per second standard.
Yeah.
Kind of more or less was just kind of like arbitrary.
Yeah.
Like they just decided 24 frames once like the technology for the cameras improved that they can just stabilize it.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
So each like era of silent film, because it's one era, but it feels almost like three. It slowly shows as it evolves. So you have like what looks like sped up movement in like the really old stage ones, which is cool. It has its own sort of aesthetic to it. And then you have like the next stage where everything moves more realistically and they're shot on like real locations, or even if they're shot on sound stages, they at least don't feel like 2-dimensional stages. They're like 3-dimensional environments that they can interact with. And the title cards are like a lot more long. Like there's a lot more to say. It's not just like to the moon and then they go to the moon.
Yeah.
You know, like it has actual dialogue between characters
Mm-hmm.
and description, and some storytelling, like paragraphs, almost like the first like paragraph of a chapter of a book.
Yeah, I noticed when for this one I watched The Man Who Laughed,
Mm-hmm.
and those dialogue cards were pretty complex
Yeah. So
for that time. I don't remember what year that movie came
there's
out.
there were films coming out of the United States, films coming out of the UK, films coming out of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say there was films coming out of like Spain or something too, but I don't know everything about silent film. But the ones that were coming out of the US were like a little bit more realistic, and like the storylines they were trying to portray were more like um a gangster who lives in Chicago, you know, like the original Scarface or something like that, you
Yeah.
know. And they're trying to do more like the slice of life stories,
Mm-hmm.
but with all the shortcomings of silent film as a medium.
Yeah.
And then the ones coming from Germany were more like dreamlike. They were more expressionistic. You know, they had like really, they felt like a combination of like sets, but the sets were done very like avant garde. You know, like sharp angles and dark blacks and crazy shapes. You know? It felt more like a painting come to life, like watching a Van Gogh painting as a movie. Whereas like the American ones and the UK ones felt like a movie that you could see nowadays, or like maybe like a black and white movie from the 50s, but with a lot more stuff hindering its ability to be realistic. Like no spoken dialogue, just title cards. They're limited to being only able to record for like 60 seconds at a time, and then they have to cut. So they have to find all these creative ways to cut between scenes, you know, or even if they're filming like a scene that's like 5 minutes long, there you can see whenever the camera stops recording and starts recording again, like his characters slightly shift to one side or the other, or like they change the camera angle so that it's not so apparent. There's a lot of limitations, and they're more obvious, I think, in like the American ones and in like the British ones. But when you watch those German expressionist ones, it's not so obvious because they look so crazy that they can do crazy stuff like crazy camera angles, or they can have like a character walk into the background and then cut to the next scene before it's been enough time to have the camera stop recording.
So the dreamlike aspect of them like hides the flaws.
Yeah, it
more.
hides the flaws more. So like they feel better because they feel more cohesive, but at the same time they're less cohesive because it's a dreamlike narrative, you know, and it doesn't need to really make sense, but that kind of adds to the enjoyment level of them because you can kind of sit back and just enjoy the show, instead of looking at it through like a modern lens and being like, you know, this is missing, that's missing, this is off, that's a little off. Yeah.
So in your quest, or I don't know, your long list of watching them, which ones have you enjoyed the most so far?
Well, I really love everything by F.W. Murnau. He's the German expressionist film director. He's also the first director to start making film noir. So he's basically like the godfather of film noir. So anything by F.W. Murnau is like basically golden.
He did Metropolis and M, right?
Yeah, he did Metropolis and M.
I really liked M.
Those are both really good.
both were fantastic.
Yeah. Definitely recommend looking him up and looking up all his movies. I would say that the original Universal films are really, really good. So The Hunchback of Notre Dame and The Phantom of the Opera. But they're not just good because they're Universal. They're good because they star Lon Chaney. Anything starring Lon Chaney is gold. Lon Chaney, for anybody who doesn't know who he is, he's the father of Lon Chaney Jr., known for playing the Wolfman, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, like all that stuff. But Lon Chaney was the man of a thousand faces. He's the inspiration for Basil Karloff, even though Basil Karloff is named after Basil Rathbone and Boris Karloff from Frankenstein. He's the actual inspiration for the character because he was the first actor to sort of like take control of his roles. He's the original method actor. He would do his own makeup. He would design his own costumes, and he would do stuff that would put him in pain for roles where he was supposed to play like a pained character. Like he would use fishing wire to like hold his eyelids open, you know, or like there's a movie called West of Zanzibar where he plays a legless war vet, and he literally created a device to like put his knees into and pull his legs up behind his body, and he strapped his legs to his back with like a corset. So he was like in pain filming these things, but he's playing these characters who are constantly in emotional and physical pain anyways. So it all plays into his roles.
Kind of like Jim Carrey in The Grinch.
He's a little bit.
I heard he
Was
he
in
had
a
to
lot
have,
of pain.
well, yeah, the contacts.
Oh,
I hear
yeah.
he actually had to have a CIA agent, like basically like give him like torture, like did basically teach him techniques to like survive torture because
Yeah.
those like contacts hurt so much.
Bruce Campbell always says that about his contacts in Evil Dead too.
Oh.
So yeah, contacts are painful, but this guy put himself through a ton of pain to pull off these characters, and I would say follow F.W. Murnau if you have any interest in silent film, and follow Lon Chaney because they both are like trying to do something different. Lon Chaney is trying to create like a series of portraits of like broken people, like broken humans,
Yeah.
and he really like leans into like certain character archetypes that I love a lot. Like he leans into like circus sideshow freaks and like and the clowns, you know, or like Vietnam or like broken war veterans, you know, like he definitely like, goes for like really interesting roles, and he always brings something unique. And he's probably of all actors of that time period, besides Conrad Veidt, who plays the main character in The Man Who Laughs, the actor who's most able to portray like real emotion on screen in a black and white film and not overact, you know? So I highly recommend watching any of his movies. But I would say if I was going to give like a small list of silent films to watch, I would say Metropolis by F.W. Murnau, which is hugely influential. And like you wouldn't have Star Wars without Metropolis. You wouldn't have 1984 without Metropolis. You wouldn't have Blade Runner without Metropolis.
Yeah.
Like, it's huge. It's such a big movie, and it's impossible to watch it even if you're like a total film snob. Meaning, and I don't mean like you love only A-list, top of the line, award-winning movies, but like if you only watch movies that are like modern movies and you cannot watch any old movies at all because you just can't get over like the age discrepancy or like the time difference, watch Metropolis. So I would say Metropolis, The Cat and the Canary from 1927, which is like it's part of like, it created a genre called old dark house, which is basically like a movie where people are all trapped in an old dark house together and have to find a way to get out and figure out why they're there. That's a good movie. You wouldn't have movies like Saw without that movie. You wouldn't have House on Haunted Hill. You know, you wouldn't have 13 Ghosts. You know, you wouldn't have a lot of really good movies. Or you wouldn't have Psycho without it. The Man Who Laughs obviously is a big deal. 1928.
I really enjoyed The Man Who Laughs. I was actually surprised that he's way more heroic than
Yeah, he's not a villain. He's the hero.
yeah, like all the like the Batman, Joker iconography kind of like, makes it seem like he's the either the villain or killer, but not at all.
No, he's like a tragic hero.
Yeah.
He's disfigured from birth. He's not like made that way.
Yeah.
You know, and like it shows like how he puts up with all this adversity, like people treating him like crap or like thinking he's freakish, but he still continues to live and still somewhat has a happy life at some point.
Something I noticed about silent films, especially with like stuff like that, is that they treat the disabled and disfigured people like in a much more like positive light than
Yeah, they're like tragic heroes.
would come. Yeah, like Freaks is like a
Yeah.
prime example. Is that they're all heroic.
Well, Freaks is directed by Todd Browning. Todd Browning is the director. He's famous for directing Dracula, the Bela Lugosi Dracula movie. But Todd Browning was very prolific, just like F.W. Murnau during the silent era. And Todd Browning did a lot of films with Lon Chaney. So if you really want to watch some top of the line silent films, like if you're only going to watch like 5 silent films, I would say like watch Nosferatu and watch Metropolis and watch The Man Who Laughs and ones like that are just like iconic.
Yeah.
But also just look up any film that was directed by Todd Browning starring Lon Chaney. There's only like 5 of them because the other ones that they did together were lost. They were like, they burnt down in like warehouse fires and stuff. But the ones that they do together are like really, really, really good. And they're all like a moral dilemma type of movie, like where Lon Chaney's character, something happens to him that completely changes his life and upsets everything he knows. And it shows how he reacts to that and how he has to like either just suck it up and deal with it or try to confront it and like change his life either for the good or for the worse. But they're really, really good. Like not just the acting, the directing, the cinematography, the scores in those movies are way better than anything else. They really do feel like a step above everything else in silent film, and they feel like the bridge to like talking pictures. Like they really are dramatic. They're not just like over the top body acting like Charlie Chaplin. But I also recommend checking out some of the weird silent films that could only have been made as a silent film. You have stuff like The Phantom Carriage, which is the first time they ever do like slow dissolves or like picture in picture. There's a better word for it, where they basically like record the film, and then they record like other stuff. Like the Phantom Carriage is about the Grim Reaper and ghosts and spirits and going to the underworld. And so they would like record these like people in these elaborate costumes that look like ghosts riding on horseback and stuff like that. And then they would overlap that film and like double expose it over the top of the other film to create the appearance that these like spirits and specters are like interacting with these people. And it's super effective and it looks really good. And that whole movie is shot through like a weird sort of like green blue filter, which gives it like an otherworldly quality. And then you have Hashan, Haxan, like Haxan.
I think I've seen that title before, but not the movie itself.
Hashan is one of like 3 films that are sort of like, they're supposed to be informative. You know, they're supposed to like teach you about a topic. Hashan is supposed to be about the witch trials and like witchcraft in the United States and the origins of the occult. And it does like go over like a lot of things in great detail. But you can tell that the way that it was like filmed and made is sort of like, it's like fear mongering. Like it is very informative and it does have a lot of truth to it.
Yeah.
But it also is there to be like, your neighbor could be a Satanist.
Oh,
you know?
interesting.
So it's like equally informative and equally like fear mongering at the same time.
So it's got a bit of propaganda to it.
Yeah, it does. But it's very, very visual. Like you can't watch it and not be like, wow, this came out in 1922. That's mind blowing. You also have Faust, which is about a man who made a deal with the devil. That one, it feels a lot like Hashan, but that one is a fictional story. It doesn't have any sort of like truth to it at all. You have A Trip to the Moon, which you talked about. You know, The Trip to the Moon was the most influential movie probably out of all these silent films because it inspired people to actually find a way to create a rocket ship like in that movie to find a way to get to the moon. And clearly it's nothing like how they did it in the film.
Not at all. No cheese at all.
No. The Wind is another interesting one. I think you would like that one a lot, from 1927.
I don't think I've heard of The Wind.
It's about a woman who moves to the West from the East Coast and like ends up living with this man who she's going to get married to. And the town that they move into has a constantly blowing wind that will never stop. And the wind starts to drive people insane because they just can't tune it out. And it's really intense. Like they'll walk out of their house, open the front door to walk out of the house, and the wind is blowing so hard that their entire house is covered in dirt, and like their hair is jacked up, and like they're blinded from the sand in their eyes, and just like, yeah, it's really interesting.
It's gonna make it hard to grow.
It's sort of a tale about like mental health and insanity and the downward spiral of people, you know, who aren't prepared to deal with things. But it's also just literally a tale about a town that's really windy and has a ton of dirt.
That I'm gonna have to check out.
Yeah, Pandora's Box is really good, from 1929, about a woman who everybody involved with her is obsessed with her, and how like her not settling down, you know, actually like drives a small town into a frenzy because it basically turns everybody against each other.
Interesting.
Yeah. You have movies like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the original Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is really early, from 1920. That show like slow dissolve transition pre-Wolfman.
That one's supposed to be very
very
famous.
Good. It's very dark. It's very gritty. It's a little messed up. But the transition between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is actually really effective. They had minimal makeup effects at the time. This is pre-Lon Chaney. And he looks like a completely different person. It's crazy. Dante's Inferno, 1911. Quite old as well. That one's sort of like a mix of like those stage play ones and like the movie ones, but you get to see Dante take his trip through the different levels of hell and how those are interpreted. And a lot of it is done with like 2-dimensional puppets. So you have like a 2-dimensional puppet of like a gaping demon mouth, and like a 2-dimensional puppet of like people, you know, who are like screaming in pain, and then like the little 2-dimensional puppet of the fire. And so like it's really cool. Sometimes it doesn't feel like you're watching a film. It feels like you're watching like a pop-up birthday card or something. Like it's really interesting, or like a pop-up book, I guess would be a better way to describe it. But the biggest thing with these silent films is that like they're so simple and so like rudimentary, but like they are so effective with what they're trying to do with so little that they're still inspirational and still used today. Like you wouldn't have Dracula the book if you didn't have Vampire the film, right? You wouldn't have House on a Haunted Hill and 13
You mean
Ghosts.
the other way around? Wait, you wouldn't have Dracula the book without the vampire film?
Yeah, the film Vampire predates the book Dracula.
You're shitting me? That's crazy.
Dracula is like a story about a man named Dracula.
Yeah.
And like he's a vampire, and it created a lot of that lore. but like the film Vampire comes from early vampire lore from Eastern Europe, not Dracula necessarily.
That blows my mind that there was like a vampire film predating Dracula the book.
Yeah.
I mean, I know
He's
that
not
like
the first vampire ever created.
Oh,
He's just the most famous one.
I understand that. It
Yeah.
just it blows my mind. I just kind of like view the Dracula book as like inspiration for pretty much all vampire media.
It is the most influential still. Like
Yeah.
Vampire is mind blowing because of what it is, but Dracula is still the definitive source for all of that. You know,
Crazy.
It doesn't take anything away from Dracula, but it's
Yeah.
just weird to see something like that that predates it
Hmm.
all. Same thing with Metropolis and like
Yeah.
dystopian movies. Like Metropolis has so much in common with something like Blade Runner or
Mhm.
like The Fifth Element that it's crazy. And then when you see it and you realize that it came out in 1927,
Yeah.
like, wow, it really puts things into a new perspective. The Golem from 1920. Kelsey and I actually just recently found out that the Golem it's a great movie, by the way. It's sort of like Frankenstein, but Frankenstein if he were written from like Jerry Siegel and Joel Schuster. It's sort of like a weird combination of like Frankenstein and Superman.
Yeah.
But we found out that it's actually part of like a 3-movie series, and the other 2 movies out of the 3 were lost to time because of fires.
Huh.
So like the one
That's
that
a
we're
shame.
watching, we see it as like the definitive version of the story, but it's really just part 1 of 3.
Yeah. Speaking of that, like, yeah, apparently pretty much most of like silent films are like
They're
lost.
Yeah,
Just-
they burned down in warehouse fires because they were made from nitrate film.
Yeah, like the flat, basically like it was almost like flash paper. Basically, like,
Yeah.
they were super fragile and
Yeah.
would just burn super easily.
Yeah. The other one that I really wanted to talk. I mean, there's tons of silent films on here that I could go over. I have a list of like probably like 50 that I think are phenomenal.
Mm.
But I would say like if you're listening to this, probably the ones you would get the most out of would be The Man Who Laughs,
Mhm.
right? Which is the inspiration for the Joker. I would even say Laugh Clown from 1928, which is Todd Browning and Lon Chaney, which is about a guy who's a clown who is depressed and like and falling in love with like this girl that he adopted
Mhm.
and like watching her like pull away from him. So it's like a bittersweet story from the perspective of a man who's a clown who doesn't want to be funny anymore. You know, that feels a lot like The Killing Joke in a lot of ways.
Mm.
And like the tragedy that ensues, you know, but then yet he's still a clown. Even after all the tragedy, he's still a clown. Yeah. And then The Bat. Obviously, The Bat is a big influence on Batman. That's a 1926 movie. It's not Batman on paper, or translated to film, but it does have the whole concept of like a man dressing like a bat
Mhm.
and like stalking around a house and taking people out. Only he's taking out like good people, not criminals. He is the criminal.
Mm.
And it has the aspect of like the bat symbol or the
Mm.
bat signal.
Yeah.
Like he shines a flashlight in the house that looks like a little beam, like a little circle or like a cone of light, and there's a bat in the center of it. It looks exactly like the bat symbol. It's impossible to deny the influence that film has on Batman. The killer of the bat even has a utility belt. Like,
Crazy. Huh.
yeah, they don't make a big deal out of these things in the film. Like they're just
Mhm.
things that are part of it. Like when the little bat light shines on the wall, people see it and they're like, "Oh my god, the bat's outside!"
Mm.
But still, like it functions the same way. It's a beacon to tell people that the bat is there or
Mhm.
that he's coming. You know, like so if you're a Batman fan and you watch those couple films, you'll be like, "Wow, like Batman's highly influenced by these films." Like Lon Chaney specifically, those couple films specifically. But there's a lot more. The more you delve into those old films, the more you see
Mhm.
like specifically like the gangster films, like the mafia style ones where there's like a crime going on, like those early film noirs by
Yeah.
F.W. Murnau. It's really hard to watch those and not think about Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
it's a great genre. It's definitely overlooked nowadays. I think most people, when they go back and watch older films, as far as they want to go back, is like the 80s.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks who are like, if it wasn't me, I don't watch anything after 2000, before 2000,
Yeah.
and they're depriving themselves of a lot of great,
Yeah.
cinema.
Like, definitely. The last one that I watched, the most recent one I watched was Chicago, 1927,
Mm.
which is the basis for the Chicago musical that everybody loves and knows
Mm.
about. And it's one of the best ones that I've seen so far. It's crazy. Like I'm still discovering these really good ones. But what makes it good isn't what you would expect. It's not like the spectacle that makes it good.
Mm-hmm.
It's the acting. It's the
Mm.
one of the first ones I've seen that's not a Lon Chaney one where the acting really stands out because it's like that. It's like the Joker. You know, in Mad Love, how the Joker is shown as like being like really charismatic enough to make like Dr. Harley Quinzel fall in love with him.
Yeah.
But then he can just flip a switch and like turn all vindictive and crazy and just like that's how Roxy Hart, the main character of Chicago, is. Like she's like this sweet, innocent, like girlfriend to the main guy, or like wife to the main character or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And he loves her and he'll do anything for her. But then you slowly start to find out that she's like sleeping with a bunch of other guys,
Mm.
and she treats them all equally good / bad.
Mm.
And then she like, when they start to find out that they're all her boyfriends or whatever, she finds ways to turn them against each other. She's super manipulative and she's a
Ooh.
major gaslighter.
Huh.
And so like she'll laugh at them in their face when they're trying to be genuine with her, you know, like, and just drive them insane toward like make them murderous towards each other.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's some really funny stuff like where, because she gets convicted for murder, you know, because she murdered somebody in cold blood.
Yeah.
And then she tries to play it off like she didn't know what she was doing. So they put her on trial. And when she's like trying to convince the jury that she's not a murderess,
Mm-hmm.
like she has them, they're like right in her pocket. Like everything she does, like they're like looking at her, like she'll bend over, you know, like in a little bit of ankle shows or like a little bit of like cleavage shows or something. And all of a sudden, like everyone on the jury, like you get this close up shot of all their heads like snap and like look at her. Like it just shows like how easily people are manipulated by an attractive, beautiful woman. It's great. It's a good movie.
Sounds like a good time.
Yeah, you should definitely check some of these out. I'll send you the list.
Yeah,
There's
definitely.
a lot of good stuff in here. I can't say enough about silent film, but at the same time, there's only so much I can say because you know the stories are very minimal. It's more about like vibe and feel and like aesthetics and that kind of stuff.
Well, that seems like a good wrapping up point for this topic. I'm sure we can go on and on and on.
I could, but it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I wish I had more to say on this one. This is one where I am not the enthusiast. Well, not as enthusiastic.
You will be.
I will
Watch.
be. Yeah, I mean, I have seen a good chunk of what you mentioned. I've seen I've obviously seen Nosferatu. I've seen Metropolis. I've seen
Mhm.
M.
Those are all FW Murnau.
Yeah. I know. Let's see. I've seen one of I was kind of like dancing around because it's an awkward topic, but Birth of a Nation.
Oh yeah, that's a great film though.
Well, it's
It like
Okay.
It's like what I was saying. Like it's trying to portray one thing, but it portrays
it's
something
propaganda
else.
as hell.
It's definitely propaganda, but
it is it's an important one in American classics, but
Yeah.
it's
it's scary.
yeah, it did revive the KKK.
Yeah, but like as a film, you can't help but watch it and be like, wow.
Well, yeah, it's like it's an epic.
Like it really does a great job of what it's trying to do, which is terrifying.
Yeah, a little too effective.
Yeah.
So I mean, I have seen a good chunk, but definitely not in a while. Not in a while.
Yeah.
So I think that's gonna wrap it up on the silent films. So I think at this point we're gonna roll for our next topic. I think I'm going to go over the list again. Just because it's been a couple weeks and this is in audio format, so our audience doesn't have it in front of them. So, number 1, Godzilla. 2, we had to replace number 2. It was originally silent films. We put down the 90s comic book bubble. It's behind the can. Number 3, he was searching for the dice. Number 3 is Castlevania. Number 4, Metroid. Which big update with that. Yeah. 5, Zelda. 6, Mario. 7, Metal Gear Solid. 8, classic anime. 9, Super Nintendo. 10, PlayStation. You can see how our like train of thought's going with this.
Yeah.
It's very heavily weighted towards video games. 11, fighting games. 12, Resident Evil. 13, Star Wars. 14, D&D. 15, alcohol. 16, Final Fantasy. 17, Game Boy. 18, sci-fi. 19, game console modding / the future of gaming. And 20, Japanese cinema. All right, let's give it a roll.
Okay. It's a 7.
7 is Metal Gear Solid.
All right. Okay.
Sweet.
I like Metal Gear Solid quite a bit, and I've played a lot of the games, but you're going to be the expert on this one.
Do I have a Metal Gear Solid sound effect on this? I do not.
I'm surprised you don't have Snake.
I know.
Snake.
I thought about it, but
That would have been the perfect extra for this episode.
I figured it would have been a little like too on the nose. So, regardless, thank you so much for listening. We are going to be back next week to talk about Metal Gear Solid.
And some Batman, I'm sure.
And so Batman will probably come up. It always comes up somewhere.
Somehow.
Yep. All right. Good night.
Later.